Did you know that so much of what you feel, do, and expect isn't a direct response to what's happening around you, but it's a prediction your brain is making? And the same is true for your horse, for your dog, all of us. Our brains are constantly making predictions. And in today's episode of the Easier Movement, Happier Life podcast, we're going to talk about how your brain and your animal's brain works as a prediction machine, and how gentle movement and awareness can help update those predictions, creating new patterns of ease, trust, and well being. So let's start here. Your brain is constantly trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Because after all, your nervous system is tasked with keeping you safe. Same is true with your dog's nervous system and your horse's nervous system. So, to keep you safe, the brain is trying to figure out, well, what is going to happen next so I can prepare for it. Again, this is true for you as well as your animals. So it doesn't the brain, because the brain wants to be efficient, it's not going to just wait passively for sensory input. It's going to jump ahead, if you will, and make these predictions. It's going to make guesses. And those guesses are based on past experiences. In other words, your history, right? And it creates a model of what is likely to happen. And that's how it stays efficient. That's how your brain, you know, keeps you safe. And so your brain is filtering through your past experiences and generates a response, right? And you're not even fully aware of this. Most of us are not even at all aware of it. It's just something that's happening, like, you know, well below the level of consciousness. It just happens. And your animals are doing it too. Your horses and your dogs, they're also making meaning of things. Their brains are always predicting how a situation is likely to feel based on past experiences. So here's the really good news. Here's the really good news. Learning happens when there's a prediction error. Okay? So let's start with a horse example. Just say you have a horse that's very girthy, or even slightly girthy or cinchy, right? So in other words, they don't like to be saddled. Something about it is unpleasant to them. And maybe it's like a minor display of discomfort. So maybe they just kind of tighten their abdominals so that you have to keep checking that girth to tighten it little by little, right? Maybe it's something a lot more obvious, like they're pinning their ears, swishing their tail, baring their teeth at you or lifting a leg. Maybe it's something like that, which I hope not. But think about this, whatever it is, whatever level of discomfort, your horse has learned that, ah, saddling equals discomfort. Okay. So now, what if, for example, you're in my program, Move with Your Horse, and you learned how to do very gentle, hands on processes that I call Debono Moves to help your horse not only tolerate being tacked up, but to actually enjoy it. And get this, not only just enjoy the process, but what you're doing with them, these very gentle hands-on movements, actually improves their athletic ability. So in other words, you help improve their biomechanics so that they can carry you more easily, more comfortably, in a healthier way. So it's a win-win-win kind of deal. So now all of a sudden you've taken my course and you go to tack up your horse, and your horse gets a prediction error because your horse was expecting it not to feel good, just assuming it wasn't going to feel good. But you started doing some Debono moves as you were tacking up. Well, now your horse is like, well, that's different. That's unexpected. Right? Your horse's brain starts to really pay attention. And it may not happen just from one time, but over time, your horse's brain will update its model. In other words, it will now start to predict good things from being saddled. I've had so many students tell me this over the years about how their horses went from really not liking being tacked up to actually looking very happy when they saw the saddle coming because we've updated their prediction, right? We've changed it. So now something comfortable, safe, really pleasant is going to happen. So it's kind of cool. And same exact thing with the dogs. And just say, for example, your dog has maybe some stiffness in your dog's back. And so going up or down stairs is just not comfortable. Like there's a hesitancy there, or maybe jumping in the car or something like that. The dog expects, again, the dog's brain is predicting that that's going to be uncomfortable. So there's hesitation. There's, just maybe you just see a slight change around the eyes or the ears. Right? So the dog is predicting something uncomfortable. Now, maybe you've learned, because I have a dog program as well. So maybe you've learned how to do Debono Moves, or you've got my book, Grow Young with Your Dog, and you did some things to help the dog have greater awareness and mobility through the body. And so suddenly now, when the dog does go to jump on the sofa or jump in the car or go up or down stairs, now suddenly the spine is more flexible. So the hind legs and the front legs can function in a more comfortable, easier way. Well, now that dog also had a prediction error, right? So that dog learned that, wait, it doesn't have to hurt to jump or to go up or down the stairs. So, and what happens, by the way, when an animal, whether it's a horse or a dog, whatever, when they're, or a human, when they're expecting something to not feel good, they one starts to restrict, right? There's all kinds of then unnecessary tension that's held in the body, and that becomes habitual. And what you get is you get a downward spiral. So things start to get worse and worse for the animal, includes us human animals as well. But when you can interrupt that, when you can facilitate or introduce a prediction error by doing some very gentle movements, Debono moves for your animals, the Feldenkrais method for yourself, right? Now your brain learns, oh, I have a new normal. I have more options. Right? So you change that model in the brain. This is really, really important stuff. And let's take it one step further. Let's take it one step further about you. Okay. As humans, we have identities. And we think of ourselves in particular ways. And I'll tell you about a friend of mine. I have a friend her name is Vicky. And I love that she always calls herself a lucky person. She considers herself a very lucky person. She said, I always win raffles, I win this, I win that. Good things always happen to her. Okay. And she truly believes that good things happen to her. Now, do they happen to her more than other people? I don't know. They seem like they do, I'll tell you that much. But guess what? It's one big reason is because she notices them. Even when something small happens that's good, she notices it because her identity is as a lucky person. So that's what her brain is going to filter for. Her reticular activating system, if you've listened to my podcast before, you heard me talk about this, the RAS, the reticular activating system. You could think of it, it's a part of your brain that kind of filters your information, your sensory information. So it's going to look for what you tell it to because it can't take in all the data. It's too much. There's too much data out there, like every bit of sensory input. So in Vicky's case, when good things happen, she notices them. It's like she gives them more weight, if you will. Now, Think about the opposite type of person, a person whose identity is that, oh, poor me, like nothing ever goes right for me. Like that type of person, which there's many people like that. And you might think, well, they have good reason, Mary, to think that way because they it does always seem like there's like a dark cloud over their head that, they're unlucky. But again, if that's their identity, if they think of themselves as an unlucky person, their activating system, their RAS, is going to put more weight. It's going to look for those unfortunate things that happen to them. And it might be something small, like the cashier was a little bit rude, or, they lost $1 or something, or they got overcharged 50 cents or something like that, right? They're going to look for them and put a lot of weight on them. So, people like Vicky and people like, Debbie Downer will say, nothing against any Debbies. I have many Debbies in my life who I love very much, and they're very optimistic people. But you can look at both of those types of identities and say, wow, it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that if that is your identity, that is what you're going to look for and put more weight on. And when the person who is, let's say, a bit pessimistic, right, that bad things always happen to me type of person, right, if that's his or her identity, right, they are going to attract, it will seem like they will attract those bad things because their brain is searching for them, as opposed to people like my friend Vicky, who is looking for all those positives in life. It's interesting. Now, how does that, so if you think, you know, so think about that. So your self-concept or your identity, it influences what you expect and therefore what you perceive. Now, how does this apply to your animals? How does it apply to your dog? Well, it's somewhat similar because your dog, if they're used to feeling uncomfortable or if they're used to feeling, it doesn't have to just be like physical discomfort, like pain or stiffness. Maybe it's stress. Maybe they get anxious in certain situations, right? So they have learned to expect that. Again, going back to our prediction generating machine, which is our brains, right? But even in safe environments, they might predict that. They might expect that. And this is where, again, the work that we do here is so important because then if you start doing gentle Debono moves with your dog, now you're helping reshape what they expect. So they can realize, oh, I feel calmer in my nervous system. One of the things we do with Debono moves with your horses and your dogs is we help generalize a feeling of ease and well-being, safety. And this is true, by the way, for you as well when you do the Feldenkrais method. That's what we're generating. Ease, safety, well-being. So this applies. So the dogs may not have the same self-concept the way we do, right? But they have a similar, I'll put it this way, they have a similar mechanism in the nervous system that is expecting or predicting things. And we can help shape that a bit. We can facilitate them feeling better in body and mind and then expecting to feel better in body and mind. Okay. So this is where instead of a downward spiral that I mentioned earlier, now you're getting kind of like an upward spiral, if you will. In other words, things are getting better and better. So how can you use this? Well, I would say start by noticing patterns. Notice patterns. Notice where you or your dog or your horse react automatically. If you look closely, if you notice yourself, you notice your animals closely, you'll start to see that there's automatic patterns happening. So again, I mentioned like maybe your dog hesitates going upstairs or downstairs or in the car or on the sofa or something like that, start to notice maybe there's a sense of anxiety that your dog has, and it's maybe not very obvious, but there's something changes about the way your dog looks or moves in certain situations. So then get curious about that. And the same, of course, applies to your horse. You know, maybe you didn't really notice, but like every time you go to put the halter on your horse, there's just a slight tension in the jaw, your horse's jaw, or maybe just a slight, you know, tension in the head and neck. Just start to be very mindful of these things. And then, I have a lot of free resources on how you can start working with your horses and your dogs. And maybe try some very gentle movement explorations that I teach and see what new information you can offer your animal and yourself for that matter. You're not trying to force anything, you're not trying to quote unquote fix your animal. You're offering something new to their nervous system, an invitation to update its prediction. So here's your takeaway: change doesn't have to be hard. In fact, it's most effective when it's soft, subtle, and surprising in a good way. In other words, a pleasant surprise, pleasant change. And remember that you and your animals can learn to move, feel, and be differently. In other words, to just experience life differently. Because when we offer new information to the nervous system, we're creating space for new possibilities to emerge. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Easier Movement, Happier Life for you, your horses, and dogs. I'm Mary Debono, and I'm so grateful you're here. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.